Rifka Lebowitz, welcome to Jewish Money Matters. It's so good to have you on the show, helping me answer listeners' questions. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me here.
It really is always a pleasure to get together with you. And thank you for your time. We have so many incredible questions that our audience has sent in. The minute I said that we had the opportunity to answer questions related to moving to Eretz Israel, moving to Israel, or regarding those who maybe are Olim, they live in Eretz Israel and still have some questions regarding their finances. The questions came flooding in, and I knew that you were the person to really help us tackle this with a lot of savvy. You are a certified financial planner. You have decades of experience in finance and personal finance, I should say, helping clients really live a financially smarter life in Eretz Israel and Israel. And you've just built such a beautiful community and a beautiful practice. I'm so impressed by everything that you do. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you.
So Rivka, really, why don't we start with, well, let me tell you, we have questions. You already seen the quality of the questions. We have questions on banking, on retirement accounts, on managing income in both countries, on how much do I need actually to live there? And then we have really specific questions that you are the person really to give us a little bit of an insight about how the banking system works, how the finances work, how investing works. We have the whole gamut here. So why don't I start with a question that came in from Miriam, and she says, this is a banking related question, but it's an interesting question because she's still living in the States. And she says, I'm living in Miami Beach and we're seeking a bank we can do business here as well as in Israel. I've gone to some Israeli banks here in the Miami area, but they seem to be investment banks. Can you please recommend something? Rivka, what do you think is going on here?
Okay, so this happens a lot. Pre-Aliyah, people are like, well, I see Poalim or Leumi or one of the big banks from Israel. I see that they have, a bank in the States. I'll
Right.
open an account, and that way it's really easy when I make Aliyah. But no, unfortunately, the way banks work is it's a totally separate entity in each country. So
Yeah.
it doesn't actually help you having an account in the States with an Israeli-owned bank.
Mm-hmm.
When you make Aliyah, you're going to have to open a new bank account here, and it's going to be an Israeli bank account, not connected to whatever you have over, in the States. And therefore, there isn't, in my opinion, really much benefit on having, an account with that bank.
Right, right. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking here. Okay, so it's important to have that clarification, and I'm glad that she's really doing the legwork and looking into it. But basically, when you get to Israel, you'll open your bank account with an Israeli bank. Right now, stay put, do what you're doing, keep doing what you're doing. All right. So Lily has a few questions here, and one is about navigating the banking system. I hear this a lot, Rifka, where people, feel like in Israel, the online banking system maybe is not as user friendly in general. And, she's looking to create savings pockets, those sub savings accounts. We talk a lot in the show that can help people really achieve their savings goals. She hasn't found that so easily in Israel. So she's asking, is there an interest paying short-term savings account? How can I get around the complicated fees here? What would you say to that?
Okay, so first of all, we just need to understand that the banking system here works different than elsewhere. It has
Right.
its own rules. I mean, really, every country has its own rules, but we're talking about people moving to Israel and then they come here and there are all these rules and it works differently. And people need to learn what the banking system here is like, what it works like, what the banks want from you, what it means to be a good client here is not the same as outside Israel. There's
Ooh.
just a lot of things that are very different.
I want to hear about what does it mean to be a good client there?
Right. Like, let's just take an example quickly. Like, if you have a client who, someone who's an account in a bank, right? And they are withdrawn beyond zero in the States, that's a bad client, right?
Yeah,
And in Israel, a lot of people have the right to go into overdraft. And as long as
I've
you're
heard.
within what they gave you with your overdraft, you could still be considered a very good client.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's just things like that. Like there's small nuances, large nuances, but they
By the
make a
way, I don't think
difference.
we're recommending you guys just do that.
Of course
Don't
not.
go
Of
into
course not.
overdraft, okay? Just because it's allowed.
Right, but it's a whole different way the system works. And
Hmm.
because of the system works a lot differently, a lot of Olim are like confused.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on here? I actually wrote a book called Smarter Israeli
Yes.
Banking.
Yes, you did. And I think everybody who's listening to this episode should be clicking the Amazon button and buying that book now and getting their hands on it.
Thank you. But the whole idea of the book is that I explained the entire system to Olim because it just works differently. And people don't understand how it works because the Israeli banks don't take the time to explain it. When I wrote the book, I went into many banks and spoke to many bankers, and they all said, "Why don't you bring this book out in Hebrew? Israelis don't know how the banks work either."
Look at that.
Yeah, right. So
Huh.
it's not just Olim, but it's certainly even more so Olim.
Uh-huh. Interesting.
Yeah, so just give a very quick explanation that when you open a bank account in Israel, it has the capacity to have many different compartments within the same account number. So you could
Okay.
have shekels, your regular shekel checking account. You could have foreign currency. You could have Swiss francs and British pounds and US dollars and Canadian dollars, each one in a different compartment. You could have investments, mutual funds. Well, if you're not American, if you're American, there's a bit of an issue, but I'm not getting into that right now.
Mm-hmm.
You can have savings plans. So that gets back to this question that I think you said Lily was asking
Mm-hmm.
about pockets and putting different savings away. The banks absolutely do offer these. They're called a peri, a pakam, a picadon, depending which type you go for.
Okay.
Anyone who has internet access to their bank account, which everyone gets when they open an account,
Mm-hmm.
can set up their own picadon, their own deposits, in Hebrew on the Hebrew website. Unfortunately, most of the banks don't offer this in English, but and they can label them. Most of the banks allow you to even label them. So with the way I work, and I think similar with you, you're saving up for your next vacation. You're
Right.
putting aside, let's just say 1,000 shekel a month. You can earmark that and write vacation, and then you know
Yeah.
what you have and take it out your bucket. And you could have 10 of those, you could have 5 of those, you could have any number.
Oh, okay. So it's
So,
very similar to what we
so
have
that
here.
part is very similar, correct.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's, yeah, so absolutely. Now, there were many, many years, as you may recall, where interest rates were really low. And in the last year and a half, they went up very significantly. So they went from getting like 0.1% on these savings plans, to actually getting, a few percent. And now as
Mm-hmm.
interest rates start to go down, we expect them to go down over 2024. The rates will go down somewhat, but you certainly get interest. And again, most of, like, at least when I'm working with people, they're not actually doing it for the interest.
Right.
They're
That's what I
doing
was
it,
about to say. This is
right.
not your long-term saving strategy. This is for your short-term savings goal, like the vacation in a few months, kind of thing, right?
Absolutely. That's exactly what I use it for
And
clients.
and would you, very often we say here on the show that to have a sub savings account, that's for your Meister money. That way, your Meister money's there, and then from there you can transfer it. Is that something that you would recommend people do, or how would you say they manage that?
So I do something a little different with Meister, actually. There's a platform called JGive. There's a plug for
Oh,
JGive.
okay.
There's a platform for JGive. They're a nonprofit. I transfer any money I have for charity to them each month. And I get a receipt, and I've got all my receipts, my tax receipts, which are called Seif 46 in
Mm-hmm.
Israel. I get all my tax receipts, which gives me tax credit against income tax I pay. I get them all from one place, and then I'm not running after different organizations to get the receipts. And then from their platform, when I've already deposited all my money, I can donate each month, or I can do recurring donations. So
Wow,
I'm really enjoying this.
that's very, very convenient. That's super convenient. Okay. So that is actually very helpful, especially if we tend to give to not to individuals, but to organizations. That sounds like a really neat. However, they could potentially use one of these Picadon accounts to put their Miser money and then transfer to individuals,
Yeah,
right? It
of
could
course,
work.
of course, of course.
Okay, okay.
Absolutely.
So just one last question on this, because she didn't mention complicated fees. Do the financial institutions tend to charge fees between transferring from each of these sub savings accounts, or have low balance fees? Or there, like, do you know? Because she didn't mention complicated fees. I wanted to know what she was referring to.
Yeah, so there are a lot of fees in Israeli banks. They basically charge for everything. When I was a banker many years ago, people would be like, "Can I sit down? Are you going to charge for that?" Like there was just this feeling of the bank's going to charge for everything. The Bank of
Mm-hmm.
Israel has made the fees clearer over the years, made them more unified, the way the banks charge the fees.
Okay.
Um, One thing that's important to know is when you're moving money between compartments in your own account, there are no fees.
Okay, well, that's good. That's excellent. That's what we want.
Yeah, yeah,
We definitely
exactly.
want that. Okay, so that's good. All right. So she asks about having, how do you work with having income in both countries and paying such high double taxes? Uh-oh, tell us about that.
Right. So there is a treaty between the US and Israel, and people that have, let's say, a salary in Israel are not double paying taxes generally. And I'm not a tax advisor. If someone needs specific tax advice, they must go to a CPA and not rely on anything I'm saying here. But generally,
Hmm.
um, even if you've got capital gains tax or other taxes, most of them will be one and then the other. Meaning, if in one country the tax is 20% and in the other country it's 25, you'll pay the 20 in the first country that you're supposed to report in, and you'll only pay the extra 5. You're not going to pay
Hmm.
20 and 5.
20.
There is an exception. If you
Hmm.
open your own business, an esek patur or morshe, then you may be liable for Social Security in America, if you're American, in addition to paying the Israeli equivalent of Social Security, which is called Bituach Laumi. So because there's no treaty on the Social Securities, but there is with a tax. So really, I recommend, first of all, just knowing that there generally is not double tax, with that exception, but also anyone who's moving to Israel must speak to a CPA because there are various things that they need to know and how to report, etc. So it's really important to get good tax advice.
And when we say that, we want to find somebody who's local in Israel, but that
Yeah.
also understands taxation in America, correct?
Absolutely. And there are plenty of people, there are plenty olim who
Mm-hmm.
know the tax system, know in America, because they worked in America as CPAs, they came here, they know the nuances between the two countries and what people need to know. So you'd definitely be looking for someone in Israel who's a CPA and probably not who you've used in the States because they don't know the nuances between the countries.
Right. And I will give a shout out to your beautiful Facebook group, Living Financially Smart in Israel, because there's a wealth of resources there and individuals who are very experienced professionals or people who recommend their own professionals. So it's a great community to look for support and I would start my due diligence there. You always want to investigate, but I would say that's a great starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Facebook group has 38,000 screened people on it who
Mhm.
either live here or are making Aliyah. They have lots of experience. There's a lot, people ask what CPA do you recommend? What this do you recommend? Don't recommend your brother, don't recommend your sister, but like just tell who
Yeah.
would you have good experience with. And it's so helpful for people.
Yeah.
Even just reading the questions, like that's
Correct.
proactive. I need a CPA, and go look there for the last 20 times it was asked, who do you recommend as CPA? But even if you're not sure what your questions are, like people have told me just by reading the questions, I realized so many things that I didn't even know to ask.
Yeah, no, I agree. I used to hang out in the group a lot. I used to
Right.
enjoy this conversation. There's a fantastic platform, fantastic conversation, and a wealth of resources. So just to recapitulate here with this last question. So it's not really double taxation. You would be paying the taxation of the one country and then the difference. So let's say the example, 20% in one country and then 5% on top of that if the other country is 25. In the event that you start a business in Israel, then you would be, and you were American, you would be probably responsible for Social Security as well as Social Security in Israel, Bituach Leumi, right?
Yes, but one
Hmm.
amendment, if you
Hmm.
open a business that is a patur or morshe, there are different types of businesses. If you open what's called a chevra be'am, which is more of a limited company, then
Hmm.
you don't have that tax issue, but it's more expensive to open that. So you need a CPA to advise if it's worth the extra expense. Are you making enough to justify it? Or is the Social Security going to come out more? There are a lot of these questions that come up.
Okay, so overall, let's talk to a CPA about this 100%. Okay. So, what about she's also asking, she's a dual resident, where to invest in the stock market? There is no 401k there in Israel. What should she be looking at in terms of retirement savings?
Right. So in general, in Israel, people are required to have retirement savings, and it's
Mm-hmm.
taken at source from your salary.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're employed, you'll be forced to have a pension fund. You have no choice.
Mm-hmm.
The pension fund itself, the deposit, gives you some sort of tax credit. And then it's in this fund, which you basically can't touch until you retire. So
Mm-hmm.
Israelis are being forced to save for retirement, which is excellent
Yes,
because
100%.
I mean, I don't need to tell you,
Yeah.
right? It's absolutely excellent. So Israel has its own type of funds, meaning there isn't a 401k, but there's Keren Pensia, and there's a Kupat Gemel, and there's Bituach Menahalim. So Israel has its own type of funds for retirement that you can't deposit in unless you're either employed or self-employed. It has to come from your salary, meaning you're not going to take your 401k, pull the money, and put it in an Israeli pension.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have our own retirement and tax solutions here. The other thing we have in Israel, which is important just for people to know if they're getting a job and they're negotiating, salary and benefits, the pension, as I said, is a given, but something called a Keren Hishtalmut, which is like it's a 6-year fund where the growth on it is totally tax-free in
Mm,
Israel. Okay, how your CPA reports it in the States is something else, and you may need to check.
mm-hmm.
But it's tax-free in Israel, and that's something a lot of Israelis use to, save for things or to have a lump sum for retirement or whatever. So knowing what the solutions are in Israel, I think is super helpful to people.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that probably you're not going to be transferring, what you had in retirement funds in the States to Israel, because there's high tax to take it out before you retire on
Right.
that side, and then you can't put it in here. So that would be a base guideline for like what's out there.
So basically, we want her to keep whatever retirement funds she has in the States, just keep it. Also be always in contact with your CPA about how to deal with that. And now now that she lives in Israel, we want her to look for the different options that she has in terms of opening a retirement account or accounts. And there are several that you can choose from. And you don't only have to do it through your employer, you can do it even if you're self-employed, right?
Yeah, by law you have to do it if you're self-employed. They don't
Mm-hmm.
actually fine you at this point, but they can and they will. It's
Amazing, which is
relatively
different from
new.
America. You don't have to do it if you're self-employed. So this is amazing. Okay, very,
Yeah,
very cool. Very,
it's
very
very
cool.
good.
When is the book coming out on the different investment options? Rivka, that's book number 2.
That's book number 2. Actually, I'm writing book number 2, but
Oh,
it's not on investments. Sorry.
oh. Do we get the scoop or do we have to wait? Do we
I
get a
can give you
little
the
bit?
scope. It's 20
Okay.
questions. It's 20 financially smarter questions every couple should discuss.
Ooh, I love that. I'm all about this. Okay, so you're coming back one day on the show and we're going to talk about
Okay,
this
we'll
because
talk about that
this is
another day.
universal language, people. It's not just about Israel. It's
Absolutely.
every couple, whether you live
Exactly.
in Israel or not. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so similar to Lily, this person is kind of getting stuck with the fees. She feels like there's complexities in moving money back and forth. She's asking, are there any tips to create systems that things that make it easier to automate transfers and of money when you have income and expenses in both countries? Is there a service that helps people get organized so that they can keep things organized? That's basically her question.
Right. So when people are dealing with two currencies and maybe two incomes, one in each currency, and spending in two currencies, it's going to be more complicated.
It's
Like it
very
just is.
difficult, right? Right.
It is. So it depends. Like this person isn't saying like what their income is
Mm-hmm.
from the States, let's say, but let's say it's Social Security. You
Mm-hmm.
can automate that to be sent to your Israeli bank account.
Mm.
Okay, or maybe you're retired and this is money from an IRA or some sort of US pension. What I would suggest is trying to live in one country if possible from the point of view of spending, just because it makes it easier, and maybe transferring money over to Israel once every 3 months, let's say. Rather than every month. You'll cut down on the fees, it'll be more organized, create a budget. Basically, when someone's doing this, they need to create a double budget. They need to create a budget in Israel and know exactly what they're spending in Israel, like which
Right.
expenses are coming out on their Israeli credit card, which Israeli, and then make a US budget, which expenses are coming out on the US side, and make a budget in both and make sure they have money for both in both places. So yeah, it is definitely more complicated when someone's working in two currencies. And I definitely suggest that 3 months, don't bring money over once a month if you can help it. Bring it
Right.
over once every 3 months, let it last for the 3 months, and then bring it over again.
Right. So it really speaks to that, that organization, the financial discipline also to create this buffer of liquidity to have in your home country, which now is Israel, so that you can maneuver your day-to-day life and not be relying on the money that you're earning on the, in the US. And I would say, I'm going to make a plug for your services, but I would say, Rivka, this is the type of thing that if I were having this circumstance, I would be calling you and signing up to work with you, right? You can help clients with this, right?
Yeah, we definitely help clients with this. And then sometimes it's more complicated than even this person said, where
Right.
like, they really can't transfer to Israel, or they need to expenses because they're running a house abroad or whatever. So
Right.
yeah, in cases like that, for sure, this is, I'm here to help people with it.
Yeah, right. So, Rivka, we have a very interesting question here that I wasn't expecting. So, this listener asks, how do we deal with, on a bitachon level, on a trust level, with the amount of gray money passing hands here in cash, from cleaning help to plumbers, electricians to babysitters? I don't live in Israel. I used to live in Israel for a very short time. I don't really remember this so much from my experience. What can you say to that? You lived there already for many years. How do you approach this?
So, I mean, I think you'll agree with me, because I think I've heard you say this before, that our money and what we do with our money really needs to reflect our values.
Have you been listening to the show, Rifka?
Exactly, right? So like it needs to reflect our values. There's two sides to this whole gray money, or kesef shachol, they might call it, but there's two sides to it. One is, am I allowing this person to not get their benefits? Meaning, my cleaning lady, just as an example, I pay her cash. She's probably the only person I pay cash to. Anyone else that comes and wants cash, I'm generally like, I'm really sorry. I'll transfer to you. I'll pay you in another way. I don't really have cash. I don't deal with cash. But my cleaning lady, I pay her in cash, but I report it. It's legal. I report her to the Israeli Social Security, which I said is called Bituach Leumi, and she just went on maternity leave. Mazal tov to her. And she's on this maternity leave, and she got paid for, I don't know, 15 weeks
Wow.
because me and all the other people who employ her are paying her legally. So we're paying cash, but we're reporting it, and we're paying her legally, and we're paying her vacation. And so cash doesn't always mean that it's illegal. But I feel like it's her right. Like, she deserves to have her maternity leave. And if she wanted it like in cash illegally, it's not helpful to her. It sounds like it's helpful, but it's really not helpful. And also, if someone's asking with bitachon, the bitachon level, I feel like we need to do the yashar thing. We need to do the honest thing, on the straight thing. And the honest thing is, yeah, that people need to pay tax. So I'm not very into that whole cash thing. And I'm very like, no, I'm paying you, and I want a receipt, and I want to do this properly and honestly, because it reflects my values, my religious values, and just my values as a
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how I
Beautiful.
deal
Yeah.
with it.
No, beautiful, beautiful. And I think this is where this person is torn. And I'm glad that you gave such a straight answer. But yeah, we have to really look inside and say, even if everybody else is doing it another way, that doesn't mean I'm going to do it that way, because it doesn't reflect my values. So I'm going to go the straight way. And of course, Hashem is always going to bless us when we're doing the right thing. So it's not even a question. So go ahead, listener, and do it the right and kosher way. Pay the way you're supposed to pay, and you are going to be fine. All right. So the next question comes from another anonymous. who's asking about retirement. She says she's getting very mixed messages about how much money we need monthly to retire and rent a nice, she says nice, which already like, nice for you, nice for me. I don't know what nice means, right? But she says rent a nice 2-bedroom apartment in various Israeli cities. Nefesh Benefesh gives a calculator, but it doesn't jive with what people are saying in those cities. I'm a little confused. What do we tell her?
Okay, so I think we're going to address this on two levels. First of
Mm-hmm.
all, I could ask, well, what does it cost to live in the States? And I could meaning like a
Oh
two
my
bedroom
goodness.
in North Dakota. I could meaning in Manhattan.
Right.
It's totally different.
Completely different things. Right.
Right. So like what economy, whatever, what are you really looking at? What does it mean? That's the one thing to address. And the second thing, and this is even more important than the first, is who are you? What kind of person are you? Are you the type of person that doesn't have cleaning help and doesn't shop much and doesn't eat out much and you're living pretty simply and you're going to the shuk to buy your food and you don't run a car? That's going to be one amount. If you're a person that's going to dine out a lot, hey, there's a lot of great food in Israel, great kosher food
Right.
in Israel. You're going to dine out a lot. You're likely to have cleaning help. You're likely to have one or two cars. It's so different.
So
So,
personal. So
right.
personal.
So I really feel that, yes, there are calculators out there. They can ask people, but at the end of the day, you really need to address who you are. When I do this sometimes with people, like create what your post-aliyah budget should or could look like, either based on what you know you're going to earn or have, or based on what you plan to have or know that like this is the lifestyle I want. So you want to translate that into money and know how much you need to earn.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes from different angles, but when we do it, I'm looking at their credit cards from pre-Aliyah. I'm looking to see their habits.
Right.
I want to understand who are these people? What kind of, miscellaneous tells us a lot about
Right.
people.
Yeah. How
Is
much
there
how
a
much Uber
parent?
Eat? How much do you depend on Uber Eats? How much restaurants? How much Amazon orders? I don't know. Everybody's so different.
Right. So if you're the type of person that's ordering from Amazon all the time, and there's lots of this miscellaneous stuff happening, then you're going to have a very different budget than that friend you asked who's moving to the same city or moved to the same city. And you're comparing numbers, but you're not comparing apples to apples.
Yeah, I think this is very, very important. Like you said, the calculators are there, people with their opinions are there, and it's good to listen. But most importantly, listen to yourself. Know who you are, how you spend, and how you want to live, right? Because if you like going to the theater a lot and you like you said, going to restaurants, and that really is so important to you, well, that needs to be reflected. And you're going to move to a city, number one, that provides for that. And you're also going to know that that's going to be part of the lifestyle that you want in retirement. But perhaps you're a person who their idea of a pastime is, walking in nature or things like that. So it's going to look very, very different. So I think the key is, like you said, it is so, so personal. And we want you, listener, to look at the way you want to live your life in Israel. And from there, let's start translating into dollars. Then you can reverse engineer, right?
Exactly. Exactly. It's also
Oh,
like scary for me, like to mention numbers on a podcast like this. Someone's like, oh, Rivka said it cost this much. And then they come and they're like, oh, I don't
right,
know why she said that. It's costing
right.
us double or it's costing us half or we didn't, like it's just so hard to say numbers in a public forum like
Yeah,
this. And
yeah, yeah.
therefore it really needs to be personalized.
Yeah, it is so personal. Look, I remember having a conversation with a friend one time, and she said, you know, homes are not so important to me. Like, you see, my house is a very simple house. The car I drive, it's very important to me. I have to have a good, comfortable car. And she does have, she does drive very, high-end cars. You would ask me, Rivka, the same question? Completely the opposite. The way I live in my home and how it looks is so much more important than the car I drive. Of course, I
Right.
need a comfortable car, but you know what I mean? So it really, this is a general, comment. This is irrespective of Israel or not. In general, we want to make sure that we know ourselves. This is very personal. And again, this also goes back to spending, that your spending should match your values, right? Put your money where your values are, all of that. It's that inner work to really knowing yourself.
Yeah.
All right. So another question on transferring, we sort of touched on this. She's asking, I assume it's a she, I'm not sure, getting our retirement funds from America into Israeli banks. How do we do this smoothly?
Okay, so I mentioned in a previous question with Social Security that you can set that up to come to Israel.
Exactly.
Other retirement funds, like your private retirement funds or whatever, your other retirement funds are not going to automatically transfer to Israel. So what you're probably going to want to do is have them dump the money in your American account, which you need to make sure that you've everything signed, that you can do international transfers, don't need to walk into the branch, all the contacts,
Yes.
SMS, that you can get SMS from Israel or somebody in the States gets it for you. Like really make sure you have full access to your account. That's sort of a side comment, but it's super important.
Mm-hmm.
And then have your retirement funds, dump into this joint account, which you're either using with the US card, or if you're focusing more on spending in Israel, having one budget and keeping it more in Israel, then I would go back to the recommendation I gave before, which is once every 3 months, transfer
Right.
the sum, have it for 3 months. There are different ways to transfer. One way is, there's all these transfer companies,
Mm-hmm.
licensed ones, obviously, and then you could transfer directly to the bank. The banks are known to have slightly higher fees, or definitely higher fees. But sometimes if you're doing it every 3 months or you brought over a large sum for a property, you can negotiate with your bank.
Oh, that's also good to know. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. That's
not
important.
written in stone.
Yeah. It's good that you brought that point because in general, sometimes we forget that, things are negotiable. Pick up the phone or show up, talk to somebody, right? You might be surprised.
Exactly. Like one of the things I did, I managed the foreign currency and investment desk at the branch I worked at. And with foreign currency, if someone came to me and said, look, I'm going to be bringing over a substantial sum of money, or I'm going to be bringing over money every quarter, can you give me better fees or better exchange rate, which is actually more valuable to most people than better fees?
Right.
I could do it. I had the right to do it and I could do it. But if you didn't ask, you didn't get.
Yes. Rule for life. If you don't ask, you don't get.
That's
Go
right.
establish a relationship in your bank. Why not? Do it and go ask. All right. So this is actually a very interesting question coming from a listener by the name Esther. I hadn't thought of this until she pointed it out, but she's asking about ribis, about charging interest to other Jews. My husband wants to move to Israel at some point in the future. How do observant people living in Israel navigate ribis issues in the banking system? Everyone is Jewish, so there might be some questions that come up. And she's right. There might be questions. So
She
how does
is.
that work? I know she's
Okay.
right and I know she's not because I lived there and I know it wasn't an issue. So let's talk about that.
Right. I mean, there are millions of Orthodox, religious, observant, whatever words you want to use, Jews living in Israel, and we're all using the banking system. And there's a reason we do and can, is because
It's
all the banks,
completely kosher, people. Let's hear it.
yeah, all the banks have a heter iska. Okay. In the branch I was in, and I think in most branches, it's actually on the wall. If anyone wants to see it, they can see the heter iska, and everyone
Mhm.
relies on that heter iska. In addition to the banks having every mutual fund and all the big companies all the companies, big and small, that manage mutual funds, that managed any sort of investment that could have a problem with interest, also had a heter iska. And because I worked in Ramat Bet Shemesh in the branch, where there were a lot of people asking about this, I actually got all the companies to send me their heter iska, and I had a folder with it. So when someone asked me, I'm like,
Brilliant.
here it is.
Right, right. Brilliant. Wow. Yes. And you know what? Also, there's another piece. If you're ever in doubt, also call a Rav and ask them, right? Show them the heter iska and ask the question. But in general, just know you can feel confident that the financial institutions that you're dealing with do have the proper heterim, and you could also obviously consult with your rabbinical authority of your choice. But it should not deter you from moving to Israel.
Absolutely not.
Which is so beautiful. So many people are wanting to move to Israel, and especially we're in the middle of this horrible war. And I mean, it's so moving to me. There was at the beginning of the war this meme about like, I can't remember what the words were, but you probably remember, like, how is it that I want to go to a place that is like in a war, but that's exactly where I want to be right now, right? Because it's ours. We're connected to it. Like
Ours.
our heart is
So
there.
connected. It's
You
so
can't
beautiful.
explain
So
that
heartwarming.
phenomenon that we want to live there, right? Who would do that? Everybody would be running out, and here we're flooding in, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I gave a talk for Nefesh B'Nefesh for Olim last week, 2 weeks ago, and it was just so heartwarming to see so many people interested in coming to Israel.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is where we belong.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
war, the difficult times, we're all one and we're all together, and it's
Yes.
really incredible.
Yes. And we want to make sure that not just the difficult times bring us together. So let's just all go and make it a big simcha and not have any more hardships.
Amen.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so Anonymous is dealing with a medical condition. She lives in the United States. She currently receives disability income in the US, and she's thinking about moving to Israel. She's wondering, how does disability work there in the event that, God willing, she's going to be healed and she's going to be able to be employed and do her job and everything. But let's say in the event that she does have to go on disability, she'd like to already have a little bit of understanding of maybe how does that work? What are her options?
So first of all, I hope that whoever this anonymous person is, gets
Yeah.
well
Let's
and
hope the answer is
recovers.
theoretical, completely theoretical.
Exactly. So the Bituach Leumi, we mentioned a few times, which is Israel's equivalent to Social Security, does have disability benefits.
Okay.
It's something that I would recommend reaching out to someone who knows about Bituach Leumi or reaching out to Bituach Leumi themselves in advance. They actually have an English site and they're actually very helpful. They've gone
Oh,
through a whole change in, I don't remember how many years ago it was. They used to be like one of these backwards Israeli places that's like really bad reputation. And in more recent years, they are amazing, super helpful. Information's out there. It's clear.
that's
So there's
very good to
definitely been
know.
a change there. However, there's certain things that qualify you for disability. You need to look into whatever you have, would you be likely to qualify? And then it could take 6 months, a year, until
Mm,
you even get the disability.
mm.
And you also need to look into, would you lose out on your current disability by moving country?
Oh, yes, that's an important detail.
So it's important that this person finds someone to help them research this properly,
Hmm.
because we don't want them getting stuck.
Yeah, we don't want them getting stuck. And, you just reminded me also of another important fact, not that I want to deter anybody, but just to bring awareness to the fact that with any move like this, we do want to go with a certain amount of liquidity. So if Aliyah is in your plans, I think a very fundamental early step is let's start saving for it. Let's make sure there's some liquidity for this, right? Whether it just reminded me because in this story, it's evident that some liquidity might be needed, but I think in every Aliyah story.
Yeah, totally. Alias, yeah, absolutely. You're moving
Yeah.
country, you don't know how long it'll take to get disability, or you don't know how long it'll take to get a job. And we have to have some liquidity.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So Frida is wondering how she can navigate. She wants to live in Israel for 6 months and in America for 6 months. How does she navigate health insurance, taxes, cars? Is this a pipe dream, she says? Is it feasible? And she also says, I'm on limited income. So again, is this a pipe dream, she says? What do we tell her?
Wow. So there are definitely people that do it. It's definitely doable.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how limited her income is, if she's going to
Right.
own property in either place. I feel almost like there must be people who do it and like, could we switch their life? Like I'll be 6 months in Israel and then 6 months
I
somewhere.
know.
Could I sort of rent the opposite
Yeah.
6 months? But
Right.
really, I think someone who's doing such a thing needs to understand that it's definitely more expensive than living in only one place, because
Mm-hmm.
there's the flights, there's the upkeep. You can be creative. You could Airbnb your house at either side when you're not there. You can definitely be creative, but there's going to be a place you're living that's officially your residence. So if you're making Aliyah, that's probably going to be Israel. You're going to need to, tax in Israel if necessary. I'm saying if necessary because not everyone needs to report tax in Israel like they do in the States.
Mm-hmm.
There are many people in Israel who don't. In fact, it's the opposite. You don't need to report tax. For most people don't need to report tax because it's taken at source. So
Because it's what? What did you say? Because
it's
it's what?
taken at source,
What do you
meaning
mean?
if you get a salary, if you're offered a salary, that's the gross salary, that's the full amount. When they actually give you it, they've taken off all your tax, they've taken
Oh,
off your pension, and then you get the net.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's your situation, let's say single person makes Aliyah, gets a job like that, they're probably not reporting tax in Israel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So from that perspective, so it definitely is more expensive because you're gonna, have things that you're paying double for with doing the 6 months. So it really depends how limited this person is with their income, and how they want to manage it, and if they're willing to, as I said, Airbnb their apartment when they're not here.
Right.
You can't do that with your car in Israel, unfortunately. But are there other things that they could turn off for the 6 months? But you don't want to lose your phone line. So you're going to move track to the cheapest track for every 6 months. It gets complicated. So it's definitely going to cost you more. And you really need to create a budget of what this looks like for you to make sure that you can really afford it.
Yeah, so a few things come to mind here. This in general, the idea that our financial, I always say, Rivka, that our financial life needs to be in numbers, not adjectives. We have this tendency to say it's good, it's bad, it's a disaster, it's limited, it's great. Show me the numbers. Right?
Yeah.
So this all to say, limited, what does limited mean? And also relative to what you want to achieve during these, kind of this like half a year here, half a year there. Maybe you are the type that would love to just do a house swap and house sit for somebody, and that would be amazing for you, and you can get creative like that. Some people might not be into that. So really, again, goes back to that personal aspect that we were talking about before, really knowing yourself and what does that really look like. What do 6 months here and 6 months there look like for you, not for anybody else, because you can map it out in the way that you want to live it, not in the way somebody else has mapped it out. Okay, so let's encourage you to get clear on what does that look like. And that can spark your creativity, because a person might not be able to risk some of the health insurance benefits or whatever by traveling abroad for an extended amount of time, or might not want to pay for travels insurance or get international insurance. But some people might need that, right? Because of whatever their situation with their health is. And some people might not care about that. So you have to really know yourself in order to really know what is the dollar amount behind this plan, right?
Right, and we need to figure out like also where our base is, and then when we're traveling to the other place, like I'm very into people always having like health insurance for when
Correct.
they travel. But are they paying at both places as if they live there, or are they taking it out only while they're away? And that creativity, that's going to make the difference. If you can
That
be
is.
creative enough to make it happen because you want to make it happen, it doesn't have to be a pipe dream.
No,
Some people do it, they own 2 houses, they pay for everything, they can afford it. That's great. But if you can't or don't want to, there are ways to make it work. But
there
again,
are
as you
ways.
said, and I
Yeah.
said, it's all about being somewhat creative to make it
Yeah.
happen.
And by the way, I just thought maybe even reach out to people in your Facebook group. There might be people who might have started like that years they didn't make Aliyah at the beginning. They were going back and forth. You never know. There might be a community of people who might have done things like that, who can give you ideas. But again, ideas of other people, you still have to get very personal with what you want. But it's just maybe a little bit of a brainstorm that you can can help you brainstorm a little bit. All right. So, Rivka, we have a question here about something that you mentioned earlier. She might be getting a little bit more specific here. I'm assuming it's a she. She says, I'm an Esek Patur now and getting closer to reaching Esek Moshe. You mentioned both before. It's so scary. What are the options? I heard someone in the online world talk about having an American business that pays her with Telushim. Telushim, did I pronounce it correct?
You did.
Telushim? Yeah, I did. Okay. A monthly paycheck. So she basically works for herself and gets all the benefits of being employed. Should I look into doing that? Should I just not stress and become an Esek Moshe and do what is necessary? These are things that I don't know enough about, and my accountants aren't very helpful. Each specializes in their country, Israeli accountant and American accountant, and they both have no good answers for me. Help.
Okay, so that's a big question. And first, I'm just going to explain the concepts and the terms.
Yes.
Okay. There's something called an Esek Patur, which is a small business, and the small business can have a revenue of up to 120,000 shekel as of 2024. And they don't need to report to VAT, and they don't charge VAT, 17% VAT, value added tax in Israel. They don't charge, they don't report, they don't get it back. That's a small business. As soon as you move to a larger business, which is generally an Esek Morshe, there are some cases where you have to be an Esek Morshe and can't be a Patur, but I'm ignoring that because it's too much detail. Okay, so I'm assuming this person is an Esek Patur. That's what she said. She's thinking of becoming an Esek Morshe. What happens with the Esek Morshe? Every shekel she earns on the Esek Morshe, she pays 17% to the government for this VAT. Now, if she works with businesses, business to business, then the other business will pay the extra 17% because they get it back. No problem. But if you're working with individuals, you can't always put your price up by 17% to justify this extra tax. So anyone who's been thinking from that Patur to Morshe has this 1 year or 2 years, basically 1 year where they've made the jump, and the second year we're like, oh my goodness, what did I do? This happens to most people. Because there's that, like, you have to make a minimum of 17% more unless you have a lot of expenses to take off. But let's just say it's a service business. You need to make so much more to justify becoming a Morshe. But it's sort of a glass ceiling. Because with anyone that I've taken through that process over the years, who have been like, okay, this is your year, you're doing it. The next year they were like, oh my goodness, what did I do? But after that, they were making so much more money that they were like, oh, of course, I could do this. So you need to have a plan for how you can make more. If you're maxed out at your potential and you're at 120 and maybe you could make 130,000 a year, it's not worth it. But if you could put your business, whatever gears need done, whatever needs done to be able to make your business make 200,000 or 400,000 or any sum of money, and you're just scared about the 120 that year where you have to make 140 to justify it, make a plan, see if you can do it, and take the jump if you can, because then the sky's the limit.
I love that answer. I think it's so important. We don't want this listener to, clip her wings here because she's scared of this transition, which is going to be a transition. We're saying there is going to be a year or two of this transition that's going to be new territory. But the reality is it's kind of like growing pains, and we want you to grow. We really
want you to grow, but we also don't want you to regret it. So, you need to be at that stage where you're like, yes, I can. I'm not maxed out on my capability, which, most people, when you really think about it, are not really maxed out on their capability. They can earn more and make this happen. But there was another part of the question that came up, and with the tlushim that you pronounced beautifully. What's being asked here is, I said before for a different question that if you have a business, you may also need to pay Social Security in the States and in Israel. There's that double Social Security. So one of the solutions for that, which doesn't work for everyone, but can work for many people, is they get paid tlushim, which means an Israeli salary, maybe by a company in Israel that's set up for Americans. They do the billing in the States. So let's say you have American billing, and then they pay you, or even in Israel, they'll do the billing, and then they'll pay you a salary as if you're employed by them. This is totally legal and fine. The companies that do it, have an okay. And then you get a salary slip with all the taxes taken off at source, like I mentioned, and the pension and the vacation days and all these things. And then you don't need to pay Social Security. So that's a structure that some people use instead of running an Esek Patur or Morshe. It can be complicated if you're not charging the 17%, but these companies have to charge the 17%. They have obviously take fees to do this. So you have to look into, is it worth it? And are you the type of business that these companies would take on? Or is it better to be a Patur? Or is it better to jump to the Morshe and have a plan for how you're making more? Or is it better to have a Chevra Be'am, which I mentioned earlier, which is a company, like official company where it's not in your name, but it's its own entity. And then you take a salary from the entity, because you don't just pull money, you take an official salary with a tlush, again, that word. And then you don't pay the double Social Security. So all of these questions come up for Americans specifically in Israel. And it really depends what works best for you.
And to help us with that, I mean, all I'm thinking is, just like in America, it's good to have a tax advisor, somebody who really can help us structure our business. Are we doing a S corp, an LLC? I mean, there's so many different options, right? So it sounds to me like it would be good for, again, we go back to this advice, having somebody who can advise us in this regard, right?
Absolutely. That's
Hmm.
absolutely necessary. Like if
This
you're
is not this is
thinking,
not a DIY.
no, right. This you have to know what you're doing right. And
Hmm.
then some people it's like, well, it was worth me paying Social Security because then I get my 40 quarters and I'll get paid out Social Security one day. And for other people, it's like it won't help me at all. And why should I pay double? And it's not worth it. So yes, I would definitely suggest sitting with someone to figure out what's the best structure for your business,
Hmm.
and for you to take home the most money in the smartest way.
And just to clarify, because sometimes these terms are a little confusing for people, when we talk about the type of person that we would want to talk to, um, it wouldn't be necessarily a CFP, a certified financial professional. Would it be, who would it be more specifically?
This could be a CPA in Israel or an Israeli CPA who's familiar with American law. And there are
Hmm.
companies that do both. There's not normally people that are experts in both, but somebody who's either a CPA but in Israel and is familiar, or the opposite. There's an Israeli tax person but knows enough about American tax, or has an American tax person in the same company that can advise.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Also, there are a few companies that, as we mentioned, do it where they take your salary and they give you an actual salary. Those companies can also advise. They can
Yeah.
tell you it's worth it or not worth it to join us. Like this
Yeah.
makes sense, it doesn't. Here's what it looks like.
So two things for this listener. Really, really don't let this growth stage kind of hold you back. Look at your business and really see, are there services or that I could be cranking up on, or can I change some things to like really, really boost my revenue? And possibly, like you said, very often we look at our businesses and with a little creativity, we can actually push ourselves, and with obviously with Hashem's help, and get past whatever kind of income ceiling we've kind of created. So sometimes we need this, maybe this is a little bit of a shakeup for her to kind of get creative in her business and get past that revenue ceiling, so to speak. At the same time, let's start looking for a right person to really who you can sit with and can really advise you. If she mentions her both accountants are not really the right people so far, maybe let's start with inside the group. I'm sure there's going to be resources in the group that she could start her due diligence there.
Exactly. Or she can reach out to me. I can put her in touch with someone
Okay,
that
beautiful.
would
And
probably be the answer.
and with that, Rivka, maybe tell us a little bit about the your typical type of client, the type of services that you offer. That could be a really nice wrap up for people to understand a little bit about what you do and what you offer, and then tell us where they can find you.
Okay, so I mean, my mission is really to help people live well in Israel, and that comes with a number of ways that I do that. It's actual planning, finances for people that maybe have inherited money or got large sums of money or are moving country and don't necessarily have large sums, but just want to know how it works. It's
Mm-hmm.
budgeting advice. It's advice for people starting out more in life, or like, okay, how do I get on the path for like living financially smarter in Israel? So I'm dealing with lots of different types of people with different types of income, really giving them the overview, the big picture overview of like what their finances look like, what they can do, whether in on a more macro, a micro level, to really live financially smarter in Israel. And that could come with, it comes in so many different ways. And I
Right.
love what I do, and I'm very fortunate to do it. And if anyone has any questions or wants to reach out or find out more about what I do, it's Rifka Lebowitz, Rifka with an F for finance. Remember that, F for finance.
Yes.
It's Rifka Lebowitz, .com, and I'm more than happy to hear from anyone who has any questions about this. And I really want to thank you, Yael. This has been amazing, and I'm so happy to, have answered questions for your audience.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, Rivka. And I should also say that everybody should look out for your book and really get a hands on Smarter Israeli Banking. That's right, Rivka?
Yep, Smarter Israeli Banking.
And they can get it on Amazon. I said Amazon before because I'm pretty sure it's there.
Yeah, it's totally on Amazon. I was just looking to see if I have a copy right here to just show people. But
Yeah, they can get it on Amazon and they can reach out to you on your website. It's always a pleasure to hear your such clarity of I knew you were the right person to help me out with these questions. I want to make sure that everybody feels encouraged to go. Do not let any of the financial aspects deter you from making Aliyah. There are people like Rifka Lebowitz out there who can help and will help. There is also a community that she's created, Living Financially Smarter in Israel, inside Facebook, that you can also tap into those resources. But please, please consider it. And if you're living in Israel and you're getting a little frustrated with the banking system and all these things that we talked about, well, hopefully this gave you a little bit of more clarity and direction. And don't be discouraged. We're excited that you're there. We're leading, you're paving the road for the rest of us. Rivka,
I
thank
hope
you so
so.
much.
Thank you.